When people talk about the influences of Star Wars, you'll hear the same titles brought up again and again. Akira Kurosawa films like The Hidden Fortress and Yojimbo, The Godfather, which George Lucas actually worked on, Flash Gordon and Buck Rodgers serials, Dune, Sergio Leone westerns, and of course, real-world mythology and religions like the legend of King Arthur, the principles of Buddhism, stories in the Bible. But Star Wars shares a fascinating piece of its story with another cinematic classic. Both Star Wars and The Wizard of Oz have been called American mythology, with The Wizard of Oz often proclaimed to be the first American fairy tale. That's of course referring to the books, the first of which was published in 1900. What unites these very different set of characters and very different genres is something I don't see enough people talk about. The main character in each of these stories aren't raised by their parents. In the MGM movie, Dorothy Gale lives with Aunt Em and Uncle Henry on a farm in Kansas during the Dust Bowl. In Star Wars, Luke Skywalker is raised by Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen on a moisture farm on the desert planet of Tatooine. With Star Wars, George Lucas intentionally set out to touch on ubiquitous elements of mythology in popular stories, consistently citing the monomyth and the hero of a thousand faces. These ideas proclaim that most stories follow similar events occurring to similar archetypes of characters. Lucas intentionally created a fantasy story where a boy has to save a princess from an evil master in a castle, starring a cowboy, a knight fighting a samurai, and dogfights against Nazi fighter planes. If you expand this scope to the rest of the saga, you'll find plenty of other things that are constantly brought up, like the Battle of Endor being commentary on the Vietnam War or the American Revolutionary War. Many of the ships, especially the pod racers in the prequels, relating back to George's love of muscle cars and street races, and plenty of more references to things like Frankenstein and Faust. One of the most famous and iconic scenes from Star Wars occurs after being introduced to Luke in A New Hope. He wants to leave the farm behind and become a pilot like his friends, but his uncle needs him to stay and help out on the farm. Luke laments not being able to go and live his dreams while silently staring out at the setting twin suns of Tatooine. The binary sunset is not just one of the most iconic scenes from Star Wars, but also in the entire history of cinema. In the moment, this beautiful visual and the incredible music symbolize Luke's lowest moment. He's accepting his fate as the suns set. His dream is vanishing. It doesn't hurt the metaphor that stars are things in space and that Luke wants to become a space pilot. He resigns himself to going back inside. Thus far in the story, this is his lowest moment. This scene is wistful and sad. Later events of the film will recontextualize this scene, because it's soon after this that Luke follows an escaped and determined R2-D2 into the desert and runs into the wizard Obi-Wan Kenobi. He learns of his destiny and embarks on his adventure to leave home. The music played during the binary sunset is the Force theme, a piece of music that becomes associated with the Jedi and their powers. This was not the sun setting on Luke's dreams, but the sun setting on his childhood, his innocence, his boring life. It's the next day that his adventure starts and he learns the way of the Force. Despite there not being a single line of dialogue spoken and only the power of music and the look on Luke's face to indicate what the scene is supposed to represent, the information is effectively translated to the audience through the use of this symbolism, as well as our understanding of the trope of the average person desiring more, and then being forcefully thrust into becoming the hero of a story. The thing is, in 1977, this trope would have been widely understood by audiences as far back as 1939, when it was used in The Wizard of Oz. Somewhere Over the Rainbow is not just one of the most iconic scenes from The Wizard of Oz, but also in the entire history of cinema. Wait, didn't we just do this? This is Dorothy's lowest moment thus far, as her aunt and uncle don't listen to her.
Dear, stop imagining things. You always get yourself into a fret over nothing. Now you just help us out today and find yourself a place where you won't get into any trouble.
They tell her she has to help on the farm, tell her to stop getting herself in trouble and imagining things, and she longs for something more, some form of happiness, hoping that it can be found somewhere over the rainbow. Which is, of course, both something that's impossible to get to, as well as something that's fantastical, as there is no over the rainbow. And even if it was possible, it would still, even in her imagination, be something that's very far. Or, as Dorothy says,
It's far, far away.
Later in the story, this is recontextualized, because Dorothy does go over the rainbow, being literally lifted into the air and appearing in a world full of color.
We must be over the rainbow.
While it's after this scene instead of before it, like in Star Wars, we do learn what Dorothy's dreaming about. What launches Dorothy into confrontation is of course her mean neighbor, who is the Earth version of the Wicked Witch of the West. The farmhands are the Scarecrow, the Lion, and the Tin Man, in case you haven't seen the movie, and you just kind of know the story through cultural osmosis. Everyone in Oz has, like, a parallel in the real world, and so her mean neighbor who wants to kill her dog is the Wicked Witch of the West. This isn't as dramatic as the Empire burning Luke's home and family to death and wanting to take R2-D2 to stop the rebellion, but Dorothy is forced into action, leaving home into the desert to protect her little companion. It's then that she meets the wizard.
You're running away.
How did you guess?
Ha ha! Professor Marvel never guesses, he knows.
Somewhere Over the Rainbow, the song, again like the Force theme, shows up throughout the movie to accent certain moments. It plays over the opening credits, and again when Dorothy first steps into Oz. I'm not just positing that George Lucas took elements from The Wizard of Oz and either consciously or unconsciously alluded to them in Star Wars. I'm stating that the binary sunset is specifically supposed to be Luke's version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. In a different world where Star Wars is a musical, this might have become a scene where Luke bursts into song, nearly identical to Dorothy's. Let's set these scenes next to each other.
It's not a place you can get to by a boat or a train. It's far, far away. Behind the moon, beyond the rain. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high. There's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby.
There's also plenty of other scenes, coincidental or not, between the two movies that parallel each other.
This old incubator's gone bad.
It's R2, you another bad motivator.
Please, Professor, why can't we go with you and see all the crown heads of Europe?
I want to come with you to Alderaan.
I never do anything without consulting my crystal first.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
There's a woman.
Who is she?
The crystal's gone dark.
There you go. Wait a minute, where'd she go?
Oh, I've got to go home right away.
But what's this? I thought you were going along with me.
Oh, no, I have to get to her right away.
If they traced the robots here, they may have learned who they sold them to, and that would lead them back home.
Better get under cover.
It's too dangerous.
I'm not a witch at all. I'm Dorothy Gale from Kansas.
Huh? Oh, the uniform. I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you.
Where do you want to be oil first?
This oil bath is going to feel so good. Uncle Owen! Aunt Peru!
So this is my argument. The binary sunset is Somewhere Over the Rainbow. George Lucas pulled from every story, every trope, every piece of history he could to make his universe, and he made what is, in my opinion, the greatest film series of all time. It is also my opinion that those times are over. The expanded universe of Star Wars started immediately after the first movie came out in 1977 with a novel meant to be a sequel, Splinter of the Mind's Eye. The paradigm of other authors making their own Star Wars stories in Lucas's universe continued until he sold Star Wars to Disney in 2012. People were no longer playing within the bounds of Lucas's universe. Disney was creating every story as they saw fit. In my observations, there have been 3 ways that other creators have dealt with the problem of continuing Star Wars past Lucas's legacy. The first is to make Star Wars content inspired by the same things that Lucas was inspired by. An episode of The Mandalorian retells the film Seven Samurai. Seven Samurai director Akira Kurosawa was a huge influence on George Lucas in the original trilogy. So taking one of the films that wasn't directly stated to inspire Star Wars and turning that into a Star Wars plot was a great choice. Unfortunately, the Clone Wars had already done the exact same thing, only a few years into Disney's reign, and they were already running out of things adjacent to Lucas's inspiration to adapt. The second method was to introduce pieces of culture that Lucas hadn't brought into Star Wars, but that meant as much to a given creator's life as Lucas's inspirations did to him. That's how we ended up with a Godzilla arc in the Clone Wars, the A-Team inspired Bad Batch. Dave Filoni's obsession with Lord of the Rings bled into Star Wars Rebels. Recently, The Skeleton Crew, a TV show inspired by 80s kids' adventure movies that didn't even exist until after the original trilogy ended, is continuing this legacy of pulling in popular culture that has stood the test of time, and adding it to the Star Wars mythos. This isn't art that Lucas would have referenced, but it is the kind of thing a modern Lucas would do. These have had mixed results, as the more that's added to Star Wars, the less it feels like Star Wars. Some people are okay with that, some people aren't, and it will always be controversial. The third way creators have dealt with Lucas's departure, and as far as I can tell the most controversial, is to make Star Wars based on Star Wars. While A New Hope is based on Flash Gordon and Dune, The Force Awakens is based on A New Hope. Shows like The Mandalorian are guilty of this too, with many people stating that the show seems like it's the creators pulling out action figures of the toys they would have had as children and making their own little game of play pretend, but with a giant budget for an audience of millions. These projects are inspired by Star Wars, which is a problem. We're watching Star Wars be reimagined, reinterpreted, and regurgitated to us as more Star Wars. It offers little substance and contributes to the problem for the future, because in the future, when Star Wars is regurgitated, it will regurgitate the regurgitated content. I think this issue is most clearly seen through the use of the symbolism of the binary suns. Because this scene in A New Hope isn't the only time we see a character looking deeply at twin suns while the music swells. It actually happens a total of 4 times in the Skywalker saga. When George Lucas ended his prequel trilogy in 2005, he has Obi-Wan Kenobi deliver baby Luke to his aunt and uncle on Tatooine. He ends the trilogy with Luke's family watching the binary sunset. This is with the knowledge, given that it's a prequel, that when the next movie begins and we are introduced to the adult Luke, he will stare at these suns the day before he decides to leave Tatooine. They're here to greet him now as Obi-Wan drops him off, and they'll be there on the day he chooses to leave with Obi-Wan as an adult. They're the bookends to his life on Tatooine. The suns are the start and end of Luke's time on this planet, his sedentary, farmer life, where he's a whiny boy. When he chooses to leave here and learns lessons and becomes a man, he will outgrow this place. As iconic as the twin suns are in Star Wars, the franchise, in-universe, Lucas has maintained that the suns symbolize Luke's time as a child. They're there in the beginning and at the end. But in Star Wars, being a child isn't a good thing. It's not a symbol of innocence. It's a bad thing. It's a symbol of ignorance. You go on your quest in Star Wars to grow up. The sunset here is telling us that the story's going to go on pause. But then when we pick up in the next movie, 20 years in the future, we will see that basically no time has passed. Baby Luke here right now is basically the same Luke that we'll see as a 20-year-old in the next movie. It's through the events of those movies that he will change, become an adult, and become a more rounded character. When The Last Jedi came out, it's a good movie, many people said, but not a good Star Wars movie. When Rian Johnson made The Last Jedi and made the decision to kill Luke, he probably thought he was being really clever to have Luke make his sacrifice and then die staring at a twin sunset. For us, the audience, this is a touching moment. It reminds us of the scene from the first movie, probably a scene that we saw when we were children, so we can get the warm, fuzzy, tingly feelings of when we first met Luke Skywalker. Except this completely misses the point. This recontextualizes the suns from A New Hope. Now the sunsets are the bookends of Luke's life. We see the sun setting when his adventure starts, and we see the sun setting when he dies. But how does this fit in with Revenge of the Sith? The suns are rising when he's born, and then they set when he leaves for his adventure, and then they set again when he dies. Are the suns just setting whenever Luke does literally anything? J.J. Abrams decides to give us one last look at Tatooine, specifically the Lars homestead, in the epilogue to The Rise of Skywalker. The last scene in the entire saga is Rey returning to where Luke grew up and burying his and Leia's lightsabers at Luke's house. And then, after she takes on the name Skywalker and becomes the next great hero of the galaxy, she watches the twin sun set where Luke once stood. But wait, this isn't the start of her journey, this is like the end of her journey. So wait, the suns are rising when Luke enters Tatooine, they're setting when he's about to leave forever, they also set when he dies, and then they're setting again when Rey arrives? What do the suns mean? We understand that this is just here to make us, the audience, remember something. To have nostalgic appreciation for what's being shown. The same way that Rey activating her lightsaber here literally only exists so that we know that she has one. In universe, in the film, taking the fan expectation out of it, trying to use the symbolism in the language of the binary sunset from the original saga, from Lucas's 6 movies, Ryan and JJ's use of the twin suns is incomprehensible. In A New Hope, the binary sunset is somewhere over the rainbow. In Revenge of the Sith, at the end of the movie, when the story and the galaxy are the darkest, and Obi-Wan hands Luke off to Uncle Owen, and they look up at the stars, we can imagine that Somewhere Over the Rainbow is playing as the credits appear. This works because, again, Somewhere Over the Rainbow and the binary sunsets are bad things when you first watch the movies. These are scenes of the protagonists being sad. The point of the song and the point of the sunset moment is them resigning themselves to their fate. Chronologically, Revenge of the Sith comes first. It's a dark and it's a sad movie, and so it ends on a sad note. A New Hope then opens on that same sad note. It's been 20 years of darkness, 20 years of the Empire's rule, and that ends the day after the binary sunset scene. It's a bookend of Luke's childhood, and also a bookend of the rise of the Empire, because it's at this moment, when Luke begins his hero's journey, that the Empire creates their biggest threat. I think that the twin sun setting right at the end of Revenge of the Sith is the same as Somewhere Over the Rainbow playing over the opening credits to The Wizard of Oz. It's setting the same expectation. Now if we look at Luke's death in The Last Jedi, as he stares at the binary sunset, imagine for a second that we give Rian Johnson the benefit of the doubt and he's not just throwing this in here for cheap fan service and is instead intending this as a follow-through from the last 2 times the symbol was used. If that was the case, then in The Last Jedi, symbolically, the scene would play out as Luke expends all of his energy to project himself to Crate to use non-violence to win the day, and then he collapses on the rock, and as he looks up, as this is the end of his life, he would sing, "Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I went to, but now I'm gonna die. One day I blew up a Death Star and jumped down where the clouds were all around me." And then he died. And that wouldn't have worked, because that's not what The Last Jedi was about. While Star Wars takes inspiration from The Wizard of Oz, it's a much different story with a much different moral. The moral of The Wizard of Oz is that there's no place like home, and Dorothy promises to never leave her backyard again. In Star Wars, Luke outgrows Tatooine. He fulfills the hero's journey. He returns home, having changed, and he cannot stay. Like Frodo in The Lord of the Rings, now that he's gone on his adventure, he can't stay in the place he grew up. Ending his life with the binary suns is saying that his journey ends with him going home. But that's not Luke's story. I hate the take that The Last Jedi assassinated Luke's character because he's grumpy that he got a bunch of kids killed. But I am fully in support of the take that The Last Jedi assassinated Luke's character by using the symbolism of the twin suns to imply that his journey's destination, his fate, was going home again. And then, the worst part is that J.J. Abrams' Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, doubles down on this. The epilogue, Rey brings Luke and Leia's lightsabers back to Tatooine, back to Luke's farms, buries them in the sand, and the saga ends with her watching the sun setting. Imagine if 30 years from now, someone made more Star Wars movies with Rey, where she's old, and then she dies. And her new friends decide to take her body and peacefully bring her back to Jakku, to bring her story full circle. They bury her outside of her AT-AT home, the one that we saw her eating garbage in, the one where she had tally marks on the wall, counting down the amount of days that she'd been imprisoned there. And then the movie tells us that this is a sweet thing because it brings her story full circle. That is how stupid it is to bury Luke's lightsaber on the Lars homestead and end the trilogy with a triumphant scene of Rey watching the twin suns setting. This is an insane ending. And what's even more frustrating is that I've been ignoring the 5th time that the binary suns set in the Star Wars saga. That's right, I lied to you, kind of. In Attack of the Clones, we see the Lars homestead for the first time chronologically as Anakin goes to visit his stepbrother, Owen, for the first time. We get multiple scenes that are inverse shots of the scenes that we will later get in A New Hope. It's the same kitchen, it's the same workshop, but this is currently Anakin's story, not Luke's. In Anakin's scene, he steps outside to think about his mother. We get the inverse shot of the shot we get with Luke. Anakin stands on the same spot, but instead of the camera showing him looking out at the setting suns, we see the setting suns cast a shadow on the house. Anakin isn't standing there dreaming of adventure and flying away. His thoughts dwell on his mother. He's thinking of home. In George Lucas's 3 uses of the twin suns, the metaphor and the symbolism remains intact throughout every use. In Attack of the Clones, the shot is inverse. It's the opposite of the shot from A New Hope. And so we can interpret this scene as trying to tell us the opposite information that we learned of Luke in A New Hope. Anakin is currently feeling the opposite of how Luke felt. Right now, Anakin wants nothing more than to go home. His challenge is finding his mother. Thus the suns stand for the same thing. But you can't track that symbolism and meaning through episodes 8 and 9 because I genuinely don't think that Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams understood it. I brought up how funny, in a bad way, it would have been for Luke to sing an anti-Somewhere Over the Rainbow as he died. And yet right here with Anakin in Attack of the Clones would be a good time for that. The opposite of Somewhere Over the Rainbow does actually happen in The Wizard of Oz at the end of the movie when Dorothy wants to return home. She taps her shoes together and says there's no place like home. Anakin returning home in this movie is the fulfillment of that circle because all 6 Star Wars movies mirror each other in interesting ways. While A New Hope has interesting mirrors with The Wizard of Oz, so does The Phantom Menace.
Storm's coming up, Annie. You better get home quick.
Better get under cover.
Are you an angel? Are you a good witch or a bad witch?
They're the most beautiful creatures in the universe.
I've never heard of a beautiful witch before. Only bad witches are ugly.
They live on the moons of Viego, I think.
She fell from the sky, she fell very far, and Kansas, she says, is the name of the star.
I'm a person, and my name is Anakin.
I'm Dorothy Gale, from Kansas.
While there isn't a scene in The Phantom Menace of the Twin Suns, we do have it spelled out to us by Shmi what they mean to George Lucas.
But you can't stop the change, any more than you can stop the suns from setting.
And if Anakin is Dorothy in The Phantom Menace, then him returning to Tatooine in Attack of the Clones is the end of The Wizard of Oz. With Star Wars in the hands of a corporation instead of a creator, we're never going to get a cohesive universe the way that we want. Star Wars will remix and reinterpret until infinity, because it's part of a big culture of movies and IPs and franchises that can never die. Within this franchise, we might get the work of amazing auteurs. Andor comes to mind, which seems to be an exact translation of Tony Gilroy's intention with the story, with the exception of Disney telling him that he can't have a character say the F word.
Fight the Empire!
The Star Wars comics at one time implied that Palpatine used the Force to impregnate Shmi, but then Disney had to issue a statement walking that back, saying that it's only a possibility of what happened. This is because it's technically never stated in the movie, it's just highly implied by Palpatine in Episode 3 that he created Anakin. Whatever Lucas's intention for Anakin's father is, neither option can ever be canon because Lucas isn't making decisions anymore. The holy texts are vague, and the modern interpreters of the lore can't make a decision one way or the other without angering half of the fanbase, so they never will. There was a scene in Revenge of the Sith where Palpatine told Anakin that he made him, that he was his father, but this scene was cut from the script. While this does show Lucas's intention, we don't know if it was cut because he wanted to leave it vague, because he thought it was too silly, which I kind of agree with. I think if Palpatine had said, Anakin, I am your father in Revenge of the Sith, it would have been laugh and groan worthy. or if Lucas actually changed his mind and does not think that Palpatine is the father anymore. Personally, I think that if Lucas made episodes 1, 2, and wrote episode 3 with the intention of having Palpatine be Anakin's father, and then cut it out at the last second, we can still take that as his intention. It was a planned story beat that would have its DNA woven throughout the prior films. The way that Sheev's DNA is woven throughout Anakin because he's his father. But because this is never directly stated in the text, modern creators can say whatever they want. J.J. Abrams can choose to completely ignore this, and have Palpatine say that Vader only turned good because he had a blood relative beside him on the Death Star. That's why he's sure that Rey will fall to the dark side, because her only family member is him, and he's bad. And the movie ends with Ben, Vader's grandson, and Rey, Palpatine's granddaughter, kissing. Because JJ doesn't care about the popular possible interpretation that they're basically cousins. The same way he doesn't care that to George Lucas, the twin sun setting symbolizes being unable to stop change. The start and end of childhood innocence and ignorance, and the darkness of the Empire, because he just uses them as a symbol to end the movie because he wanted to. Thank you for watching. I tried to keep my opinions about the sequels mostly to a minimum in this video to avoid angering people. I tried to avoid making snide remarks, but they may have slipped in a little bit. The truth is that I do really like The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, but I like them as movies and not so much as Star Wars movies. They're good movies, the way that some movies in the MCU are good movies. But Lucas's 6 Star Wars films are, in my opinion, a league of their own when it comes to cinema. I've made some Star Wars videos before, and I plan to make some more in the future, but this channel is mostly about true stories that are stranger than fiction, and fictional worlds that are so interesting they may seem more real than reality. So if you'd like to see videos like that, or even just see more videos I make about Star Wars in the future, make sure that you subscribe. Once again, thank you for watching. Be sure to be nice to each other in the comments. Consider supporting the creators you admire. Never lose sight of what's most important to you. And if you would like to help out this channel, consider joining my Patreon, linked in the description below.